All right, hello everybody, and welcome back to the Double N Radio Gamescast, episode number 43. As always, I'm your host Ryan, and I'm joined today by my lovely cohort of co-hosts. Wait a minute, where Alex, Brett, Tess, that?
You're stuck with me.
Oh no, we have a wonderful two-person show planned for you all tonight. It's gonna be great.
The last time it was just us two, we were doing a video on Last of Us, the original.
Yeah. So we got an interesting lineup tonight. We got some stuff we wanted to talk about for a while. That we've got an opportunity now to go into Ubisoft games because no one else plays them in our group.
No one else is crazy enough to play them except us two.
We've at least tried all the recent ones, so I think we'll go into detail about that. But first, we've got some news to talk about.
Oh boy, howdy do we.
Oh, of course. And as always, this is a Star Wars podcast. So we're going to kick it off with arguably the biggest rumor news. None of this is like super clear, but we are getting a lot of rumors like right as of now, about an hour ago, that something KOTOR related is happening in a studio that is not BioWare or EA related. So
it might have a chance.
The thing with this, we got rumors last year that a KOTOR remake was happening, and then we didn't hear about it. So I think this isn't the same thing, because if a KOTOR remake was announced last year, it would have been with EA because of the exclusivity agreement. So I think this is probably, that means either last year's thing was bunk, or something behind the scenes happened, and maybe they had gotten the license to develop something earlier, and they just hadn't actually finalized it until this year. And there still is the fact that EA license, they've announced they're not renewing it, but it does continue through the license period, I believe, which is either 2022 or 2023. I'd have to double check.
It's 2023 from what I remember.
But yeah, we also don't know if that is certainly something that might change. Like, I don't think that's something that is going to be too hard legally to see change.
Right.
I could see that being like both parties agreeing that contract's not really working for them and dropping it. So that has happened before in video games. I wouldn't be surprised if that is the case. So we don't know,
especially considering how big the license is.
Yeah.
You know? Like, it's going to be a big deal.
Especially considering it's not that EA can't make Star Wars games; it's just they're opening it up. And I think a lot of people at EA are.
I feel like that statement is somewhat debatable.
I mean, EA made a Jedi Fallen Order. Like,
they did. No, they did. Their last batch of Star Wars games, which was
Squadrons,
Fallen Order,
was wonderful.
Squadrons, and also the way that Battlefront 2 ended up. It's just, I say that because in the entire lifetime, in the entire span of time that EA has had exclusivity, we haven't had that many Star Wars games.
Yeah.
It feels like, and this, you know, whether this is true or not, it just feels like there are more games that were canceled or never saw the light of day compared to
Absolutely. It's also important to note the EA execs that made that original contract agreement don't work for EA anymore. That swapped over like a year ago. So the people that have been running with that agreement now are not people that were originally involved in it, and probably don't have much stake in it, is my bet. It might have been wanting to take the company in a different direction. So yeah, we have heavy rumors that we're going to be getting something KOTOR related. So originally this was just from a kind of like Star Wars news thing called Bespin Bulletin, and they stated that they had reports a new installment of the RPG series is in development. That specific outlet is known for being not always 100% reliable. It's not to say they're not reliable, but leaks are always a little bit flaky, so it's hard to know. But then they said one of their sources might have been Jason Schreier, who confirmed that it's not with EA. So if one of the sources actually is Bloomberg's Jason Schreier, he's known to be very, very reputable. And I would be very surprised if he knows about this, that it isn't happening.
He's he's probably one of the most like reputable and like well-known game journalists out there.
Absolutely. You know? And that's the important distinction here, is he's a games journalist, not a like leak outlet. So he's not going to be reporting on things that are like generally just leaks. He'll usually be reporting on things he has talked to people at the company working on them with. So it's entirely possible Schreier is reporting that because he might have talked to people but doesn't want to break NDA or anything.
Right.
So
Right.
heavy rumors we're getting a KOTOR related thing. Again, this is likely not going to come out for a while. And it's rumored to not be part of EA. EA is still technically working on a Star Wars game that isn't Battlefront 3. Is the other rumor we got, is that EA is working on another Star Wars sequel that isn't Battlefront 3, and I think also isn't Jedi Fallen Order 2, because we know that Respawn is going to be working on that as a series.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah, because Respawn, like, no spoilers for the ending of Jedi Fallen Order, but Jedi Fallen Order has a bit of a sequel bait at the end. So
Yeah.
I think everyone kind of expects that there will be another Fallen Order. I think they've already confirmed that there will be another, just not whether or not it's in active development. I would assume it is.
People definitely want a sequel as
Absolutely.
well, I think.
I think everyone who
It's
played that game really liked the cast and characters and wants to see more of them.
Oh yeah. Well, they and again, without spoilers, they set it up in a way where they can very much have uh sequels that aren't really like, they don't have to be interconnected. It could just be more adventures with these characters, and I think most fans would
Yeah.
be fine with that, you know.
Yeah, I would heavily assume we're going to be getting either a Jedi Fallen Order game sequel. It's possible we also get maybe some kind of media sequel if that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean the main character is both the voice and the likeness of the
Yeah,
voice actor. So they could totally get him to do some live action, which would be cool. I would love to see what
there's
see
a
what
there's a precedent for that with Katie Sackhoff in
yeah.
playing Bo-Katan. So yeah, it's totally possible that something like that would happen. But we would assume that in other Fallen Order games in development, we know Battlefront 3 is likely in the works.
Although
Uh,
that's not coming out for a while
yeah,
because
because
currently
DICE is
they're
like,
Dice all hands on deck. We have to make this Battlefield game good, or we're in deep crap.
DICE is in a bit of a situation. So
they've got their hands full, and honestly, that's the way they should have been doing things all along. They make such big like projects that need a lot of manpower. Like I feel like especially compared to other EA games. So
yeah.
I am happy to see that everyone's coming together on this one because they really need it.
And what? Now that it's just the two of us, and I think we're probably the most attached to Star Wars games in the group. I want to talk a little bit more about some news we talked about last week, which is the massive developed Star Wars game that we know is in development right now, or not Star Wars
Right.
game. Star Wars game. Sorry, I don't know what I was talking about. Not Star Wars game. They are making a Star Wars game.
Right.
So for the people that don't know, Massive developed The Division. And the open world Star Wars game they are working on is being headed by Julian Garrity, who was the director of Division 2, which we've both played at least a little bit of, I believe.
I played a good. I would like for a looter shooter. It's not a whole lot, but I've played a good amount, I
Yeah,
guess.
so have I. So I've personally, that has me pretty excited for this because I think the Division is a really, really good developer for a Star Wars game. I could see an open world Star Wars game being handled by them really well, especially if it's like a bounty hunting game.
hmm
I think that is a great choice.
What I'm worried about is that from what I remember, they did say it was narratively focused, right?
I mean, the
If
Division is
there's
technically narratively focused.
That's what I'm saying is that as much as I like Ubisoft games in general, and we're going to get more into that, they always seem to struggle on narrative, or at least it's always unbalanced because it's like, oh, it
Yeah,
has good writing, but the structure's kind of a mess, or it's vice versa, where it's like, oh, the structure's pretty rock solid, but like, oh my god, the script is a mess. you know, like there's very few examples in my mind where they've really been able to like nail it down properly, and that's what I'm worried about. Uh, I feel like for a Star Wars game, if they can get good characters down, I think that's going to be the most important part.
definitely.
But they've always struggled with that, So we'll, fingers crossed. But we'll see.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I do think the thing I would be most excited about is the gameplay, because I think a lot of people have problems with cover shooters in general, but of the cover shooters that I've played, I think Division 2 is really, really solid at nailing that like tactical feeling of a
Mhm.
cover shooter and making it feel a lot more active than it really is on a gameplay level.
The
Um,
common the
yeah,
common comment for that is that it feels like real time um, XCOM, which I
yeah,
actually think
absolutely.
is pretty. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good comparison because there's so many systems and so many little mechanics going on that make it feel like legitimately tactical, whether you're playing on your own or with buddies. Like
Yeah,
it does a great job at that.
that's my
For
favorite
me.
aspect of Division combat. So I would love if they bring that to Star Wars, especially having played. Think you've played probably a little bit of the New Republic or Old Republic MMO, Wyatt.
Oh god, a bit a long time
Yeah,
ago.
it's been out for a long time. But the one thing I really really liked about the game is the smuggler and the like other ranged classes could use cover mechanics, and had some
Oh,
really cool like
interesting.
stuff that they could do with cover systems, and as well as it being super narrative based. So I think that was a really fun kind of proof of concept for what this could look like. And obviously, I think this will be executed a lot better because that was a tab targeting MMO, and this is
Right.
uh, presumably some kind of shooter. I would bet.
Their shooter mechanics are always pretty good. Like they always had like really good feedback for their combat.
Yeah,
You know, whether their combat as a whole is kind of depends on the game, but uh at least their feedback, and I would say combat in like I feel like most of their games at the very least have been pretty good. And especially massive, you know, they've been with Division for so long. I think their gunplay has always been really really good. So that's I mean, and it's definitely different, you know, blasters versus like more contemporary weapons, but that does leave me hopeful. Leave me feeling hopeful.
yeah. I'm just imagining what a like bounty hunting Star Wars game would look like if it had the Dark Zone mechanics. Man, I could get behind that.
Yeah, we need another bounty hunter. We need another Jango Fett game or something like
Yeah.
that at least.
And we do know that that game is using the Division's Snowdrop engine, so and that engine performs remarkably well, like for how
Well,
good it
there's
looks.
and I was one of the most disappointing things is like when I was looking around online, kind of looking at this news, there were a lot of people saying like, "Oh, they're using the Snowdrop engine. Didn't that come out however many years ago?" It's a seriously impressive engine. Like and engines don't just come out for 1 or 2 games, they usually stick around for a good long
Absolutely,
while
like
before
developing
there's
an
a whole engine
engine
switch.
is usually more expensive than developing a game, and if you're using that for one game, it's a waste, really.
I mean, perfect example, Titanfall 1 and 2 are both made in the, uh, in Source. You would never know that, but they were, and they look great for the you know,
Yeah,
for
because
the time
they
they came
use
out.
Source for Titanfall. I believe Titanfall 2 is in an offshoot of Source that they started to customize.
Still though, I mean, you're still working
I
with an
Source
engine
Engine still holds
that's
up. Like games are still made in Source Engine, even though Source
that's
2 is
I
out.
mean, that's what I'm saying though, is that like it still holds up today and it came out, you know, however many years ago.
Over
So
20 years ago at this point, I think. It's
yeah, and like Division 2 is still a great looking game. Like the Snowdrop engine, like you have nothing to worry about there. It's a seriously impressive engine and obviously massive know how to use it. You know, they've made their last
oh yeah.
couple of games with it. So
So yeah, I'm definitely excited to see what that is. I hope they reveal it when it's ready to be revealed. Is I think my big takeaway.
yeah,
Because Star
yeah.
Wars games especially have this habit of being announced at really weird times.
They get ahead of themselves,
Like
I think is
Jedi
the
Fallen
best way
Order
to
was
put it.
announced super early on, and then we didn't see gameplay until basically the game was out.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's Star Wars, so they want to, you know, it's like, oh, we're working on a Star Wars game. Everyone gets excited. They just get
Yeah,
really ahead of themselves,
which
So
I think has bitten them in the past, especially with like 1313, people being so excited for that game and then it getting canceled.
oh, I mean,
Um,
I remember when the first EA Battlefront game was announced. It was literally
yeah,
like a 10-second cinematic of like someone walking through the snow, and then you see an AT, and like that's it. We didn't hear anything for like another year or something like that. Oh, we had like a tech demo or something like that.
and I don't always think that's a bad thing to do. I think in the case of very specific things, like if it's the first Star Wars game in a long time, I think that's a good thing to do because that tells people they're working on it, right? Like people know they're going to be getting Star Wars. Same
Yeah,
thing
and
in
it's
the
not
case
like
of
it's
Elder Scrolls, because like Elder
that's
Scrolls
fair.
6 announcement. It's just
That's
nice to
fair.
know that they're
It's
working on it.
yeah, it's just it's weird how there's like so much hype built over
Yeah.
it's kind of nothing. I don't know. It's that kind of depends on the person, I guess. But it's like I feel like if you want to announce something, you got to have something to show.
Absolutely.
I think you got to wow right away.
So, speaking of details of Star Wars games, there's another Star Wars game that got delayed last year that I think a lot of us are like cautiously optimistic for, and that is Lego Star Wars: The Skywalker Saga.
Yeah. To be honest with you, I love Lego games, but just to be honest, I haven't really been keeping up with it at all. Just because it's like it's a Lego game, it's probably going to be good. I don't have
Yeah.
no concerns about its quality whatsoever.
So, this is courtesy of the latest issue of PlayStation Magazine, issue number 184, has revealed some details on Skywalker Saga that I think Wyatt will specifically tickle your fancy.
Oh, okay.
So, for some reason, this is a talking point that you can play through the films in any order. That's always been the case with Lego Star Wars, so it's interesting that was...
Yeah.
They've needed to confirm that and reconfirm it over and over for this. The game includes 800 unique characters, 300 of which are playable. So not all 800 are playable, but...
Oh my word.
Still, 300 playable characters is a lot.
Is this, how do you say, if I go there for a second, everyone is here?
And Wyatt, wait a moment. I got to confirm to you, we
Oh.
have confirmation that Babu Frick is a confirmed playable character.
It's my favorite Star Wars character. Oh my god.
I love it so much.
Babu, my guy.
Okay, so this is where things get a little bit spicy. We gotta reveal that the game will feature ADS shooting, aim down sight shooting.
What? What?
It'll have a new upgrade system, more in-depth quest system, which will allow players to do multiple quests simultaneously in a new quest tracking system. So yeah, the ADS shooting I think is by far the most surprising thing.
What?
In that,
because I remember in what was it, Star Wars? I think it was Force Awakens, Lego Star Wars Force Awakens. They did have ADS sections, but it wasn't something you could do at will. It wasn't part of the main control scheme. It was specific parts. But this is just at any time.
We don't have that amount of detail on it because this is just from the lead, one of the lead designers at TT, Don McDiarmid, talking about the game. So we don't really have confirmation about whether or not that's ADS at any point. I would assume it's probably a mode for the characters with guns, would be my bet.
Right. And then melee-based characters have something else going on.
Yeah, that's my assumption. I don't think you would be able to aim down sights to attack with your melee. But I'm betting characters that have a pistol or a rifle, when you're using that, you can toggle into aim down sights modes to get that first-person shooter feel. We have confirmation there are 23 total planets and moons in the game, with 28 unique locations players can visit. Each location has a ton of quests, items, and characters to find. So it's a lot more... It seems like this is structured a lot more like a galaxy than a traditional level-based thing.
Oh my god.
From what we're seeing. And this is where it's getting a little bit interesting, Wyatt. Each planet has its own local space where various random events take place, including off-world quests and dogfights.
What?
So we're starting to get into space sim territory.
Oh my god.
Now this is where I started getting extremely interested. Players can be intercepted by capital ships in space, and then the player can then choose whether or not to fight to disable that ship or enter them to explore the inside. We're getting crazy with our Lego Star Wars. Why?
I'm kind of speechless right now.
I am, yeah, this is getting me pretty excited just on the idea that you can do that, because that's something I always love, is the ability to enter a ship attacking you.
How is it that Lego are the only people out there that can make consistently good Star Wars content now? Just soak that in for a second. Not that I'm trying to diss Lego or anything, but
it's not that hard of a license to make a good video game for. right?
No, but that's what I'm saying is that like, but they're not just like decent. They've always I can't think of a
They're
single
going above
bad
and
Lego
beyond.
game. Yeah, and even with like their previous like can you think of a bad like main series like Lego game off the top of your
I
head?
mean, there have
They're
been
always like,
mediocre ones, like the Hobbit one is just kind of forgettable, but
but not like
they're
bad.
never actively bad. Yeah.
Like at the
Um,
very least, at their very worst, they're still going to entertain your kid,
yeah, yeah.
right? They're still going to do a decent job at entertaining your kid for a couple hours,
To
and
me,
that's
this
all.
really sounds like they're trying to make a game that's appealing to Star Wars fans of all ages, like not just kids, not just adults, but making something that people that like Star Wars games will get a lot of good
And this feels
time out of.
like it's almost like in terms of because there's been a lot of Lego Star Wars games,
Yeah.
right? Like they'll come out with individual like eras, and then they'll start combining all the eras together. Like there's been a lot of games and re-releases and stuff, but this doesn't feel like another Lego Star Wars game. This feels like the Lego Star Wars game.
And of
You know what I'm
course,
saying?
Wyatt, I have not yet mentioned the most important thing. Finn's character will be getting more screen time in the game than he got in the sequel trilogy. I I love that this is a specific talking point. Which should be this says that the people making this game know that people thought that was a problem. And are
That's
now
such a big like flaming middle finger to
yeah.
Disney. I feel like as much as I
Oh
defend
man.
the sequel trilogy, that's always been like one of my it's like Finn is such a likable character, and the fact that he has nothing to do after Force Awakens makes me so sad. So that's I do like it's funny, but I'm glad to see that it's there legitimately. you know,
Yeah.
and full voice acting too, right?
I believe so. I'm pretty sure they said this game would have voice acting. I would bet it goes for a mix of full voice acting and regular Lego shenanigans. Because oftentimes when the Lego games try to go for full, like very serious voice acting, the tone just doesn't land. Like that was a
To
problem with
be
the Lord of the Rings Lego games.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be kind of like goofy, but I think for a game this long, you can't go without some kind of voice acting because
Yeah.
it seems like there's gonna be so much content here. It's kind of insane. I mean, you're getting in 9 films worth. I mean, are they doing like anthology stuff too? Like, are they having solo stuff or Rogue
I
One stuff?
don't think so. I believe this is very specifically because it's the Skywalker Saga. I think it's very
Mhm.
specifically about the
Even then,
mainline
though, that's
films
that's 9 movies worth
and
of
tons of
content in
stuff.
one game. Yeah.
And you have to assume they're probably going to add probably a decent amount of Clone Wars in there as well, because
Yeah,
Clone Wars is Anakin. Like Anakin's in that quite a lot. So I would be very surprised if we don't get like Rex and Ahsoka showing
I'm
up as well.
and thinking about it too, I'm just kind of shocked that they didn't take the route of like, okay, we're doing this new like Skywalker Saga thing. It's going to be different game. There's going to be like very different gameplay from our original games. What we're going to do is like almost kind of like a Master Chief collection kind of thing where we just kind of release them separately when they're ready. But
Yeah.
no, they're doing it all in one,
Because it
like
really
on
seems like they're trying to
release.
make this like an interconnected thing.
Yeah.
Which I'm totally down for. Even if it's a little weird, probably going from Clone Wars era to Republic era, or New Republic era, it's gonna be odd, but I'm super down for that. Like I have
I'm
no
just
issues.
imagining, and like again, I don't want to diss on Lego, but I'm just imagining like if this was not a Lego game, but just a giant Star Wars game that was all 9 movies.
Be
You know what I'm
insane.
saying? Like
Probably
that
way
would
too
be
expensive to make, but I would love it.
well, yeah, yeah. I would say again, I don't want to bash on Lego, but like having it be a Lego game probably helps with budget quite a bit.
Yeah.
And it's probably easier on the artists in a certain fashion as well.
All right. We also have some interesting news from the Bethesda modding community. They have
Oh,
released a tool, an app that can now replicate speech based on the voice actors in the Bethesda games. So you can add lines for
what?
characters that replicate their thing. I'll link you to this, Wyatt, so you have links.
What?
It for some characters it doesn't work super well, but for others, like the guard voice they add is incredible. Um, it's bonkers. Like some of the stuff is just the tech behind it is kind of crazy. And I love that this exists because it means that now people can legitimately make changes to like main storylines in Bethesda games. And it'll be a little off-putting probably to hear the synth sounds for some characters, but for some of them they're remarkably good. And you could add new content with existing characters. Like that's something I'm super excited to see what people do with this.
I the modding community for the modding community for Bethesda games, I feel like legitimately sometimes have more talented people than Bethesda themselves.
We
That's how
gotta
it
see
feels
when Bethesda
sometimes.
finally releases a game.
That's insanity. And this is like what, this is what Ubisoft was attempting with Watch Dogs Legion to a very mixed to very mixed results, I would say, to put it
Yeah, I mean this is a little
lightly.
bit different in that it's very clearly kind of janky, but kind of janky in modding is way better than it not working at all.
Yeah, but you have to. Well, yeah, if it's kind of janky, it's like you have to give these people credit. They're
Yeah.
modders. They're probably. I mean, are they even making a dime off of this at all? Are they
Oh
paying
no,
for
absolutely
this?
not.
They're doing
Uh,
this for free.
the developer
Like,
of this does have a Patreon, for mod
yeah,
developments in
but
general,
but
but
they're
like,
not. But they're not. You know, there's there's no paywall behind using
yeah.
something like
In fact,
this.
I have it
And
downloaded. I'm gonna try it out after the podcast and see what I can get working.
that is
It's a super cool
imagine
tool. So,
imagine the amount of memes we can create now because we can make all of these
because
Bethesda
I mean, Wyatt,
memes
if you skip
have
to
them
to
say whatever we want.
minute 2 in that video, the Northern Guard starts talking, and it is almost indistinguishable from regular speech for that character. Like some of the characters, it's very noticeable that it's AI speech, but for that specific character, it's almost indistinguishable. Um, I think it's legitimately kind of
Oh my
stunning.
god!
Yeah, you.
What?
I can play this for the podcast as well, and jump to that
Oh
point in
my
time
god!
so that you guys can hear what this sounds like. And this is not a a person speaking. It's an AI
You're
speech.
synthesizing the final audio.
Check the GitHub page or the mod pages on the Nexus to see more details, instructions, use cases, and mod ideas.
Again, I'm kind of speechless.
Crazy good. And it's called XVA Synth for anyone that wants to take a dig at this themselves. It is freely available, just a GitHub download for your computers, and you can mess with it. And it works across all major Bethesda games. They even have a list for Starfield when it inevitably comes out, that they're planning to have this working for Starfield. So it's super impressive. I think this is the kind of thing that, like, if this kind of tech was in Watch Dogs Legion, I think would have made a pretty big difference in helping the game out. So really excited to see where this goes. All right.
Y'all in the Bethesda modding community are a bunch of crazy people. I love you guys, but oh my god.
Yeah, great community. All right, so we got some
Wow.
other news from this week. That's most of the Star Wars news that we have any kind of confirmation on. We got Hitman 3 came out, reviews incredibly well, but the launch itself has been plagued with some major issues. And this is the weird thing. So Hitman 1 and 2 had always online DRM. Hitman 3 does as well. But for Hitman 1 and 2, people assumed it was like a Square Enix thing of wanting that to be there. And it's just weird because it's not like the game had microtransactions. It was supposedly for the sanctity of the leaderboards, but that never really worked anyway. So no one really knows why it existed. And for Hitman 3, it's proven to be a bit of a problem because Hitman 3 is the biggest launch the series has had. I think part of that's due to the fact that you can play the other two Hitman games within Hitman 3, so people that are new to the franchise can jump in at Hitman 3. So they're getting their old fan base as well as new people into it. All of them are logging on at once, and the servers are down basically the entire day of launch. All right, but Wyatt, wait. There's some complications to this. If it was just server issues, you could play offline, right? But if you play offline, you can't earn any of the challenges. You don't get any achievements. Nothing related specifically to like any kind of progression. Which the game has tons of progression, but you need to be online for it to work. And of course, Hitman 3 has a progress carryover, so you can carry over all your progression from Hitman 1 and 2. But for some reason, they decided to release the website to do that carryover process the day of launch, which meant everyone was trying to do it to carry the progress over.
Oh
Now,
no.
there's a little caveat with that. You can play Hitman 3 without doing that, but when you do inevitably carry your progress over, you will lose all progress in Hitman 3 for that to carry over. So basically, people were not playing the game because they don't want to play the game and lose all their progress. And up until it's still happening, there are still issues with this software to do this account transfer progression carryover thing, where it just doesn't work half the time. And so you can't carry over your progress. And if you can't carry it over and you want to play Hitman 3, you're going to lose everything you do until you can. So,
You can't see my face right now, but I'm doing like a disappointed parent, like rubbing
and
my,
it's so
my
confusing
temples.
because the fact that this is in Hitman 3 means it was IO Interactive's doing and not Square Enix's, because Square Enix is not publishing Hitman 3. IO is self-publishing. So they decided this was necessary and this was the correct way to launch their game. And Hitman 3 is fantastic. Like, it is an amazing stealth game for anyone that hasn't played it. The new Hitman series, I finished 3 relatively quickly because it's not a particularly long game if you're rushing the story. And it was really, really solid the entire way through, and I can't wait to go back and play more. But it is just stunning how poorly this like online component of the launch has been handled, and the servers are still just fried. Like, half the time you don't want to play the game because if you do anything, none of your progress is going to be saved. So it's very confusing. It's a really iffy situation to be in. Can we please stop doing always online games?
Especially for single player games with like no.
Yeah,
Is there any kind of multiplayer whatsoever?
I mean, there's leaderboards. That's a pretty
Well,
big component, but like, still. Then all you need to do is have it so the leaderboards are the only thing tied to that online component. Like, I get needing to be online if you want to upload to a leaderboard. But if you're offline, you should still be able to play the game and progress in your own like single player stuff that doesn't affect anyone else.
Because there's going to be plenty of people. Like if I ever play it, there's going to be a lot of people like me that just don't care and just want to play the game.
Yeah.
And they're being punished as a result.
It's really, really weird decision making, and it feels like old school Nintendo making a really dumb decision, like calling their console the Wii U. When it's a really good console, but they just made this one decision that's just so confusing. So I'm still super confused as to why IO is doing this. And the bigger issue is that IO has not been very communicative about the problem. So it's super hard to know if like it's a server issue, if the game's just not working. Like, I had a weird issue earlier today where I was playing and then for some reason it gave me an error that a menu wouldn't load and then closed the game. But it was related to the online connectivity, so I don't know what was happening. And quite frankly, I'm just very confused. So, yeah, it's especially harmful considering levels in that game can take up to an hour or so if you're doing specific things.
The real question is, though, can you play it on an Xbox One and a PS4?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm playing it on a PS4
Apparently
right now.
apparently that's too difficult to ask these days.
Yeah, it is totally playable on old school stuff. It's also remarkable considering Hitman 2 was like 100 gigabytes, and then Hitman 3 somehow managed to fit Hitman 1, Hitman 2, and Hitman 3 in 80 gigabytes. So they're using some black magic compression over there that I really want to get my hands on. And it works startlingly well.
Hey, Activision. Hey, you guys paying attention? They're able to fit 3 games in 80 gigs.
3 very big games with like entirely differently themed areas. Like, there's tons of content.
Isn't that great? Isn't that great?
Yeah, I really wish Call of Duty could just compress their stuff.
How big is Cold War now? Hold on.
I think altogether Modern Warfare at this point with Warzone is like 257 gigabytes, something crazy like that. Yeah, so it's a little bonkers. But yeah, and other more happy news, we got some confirmation that Valve is working on video games.
Oh my god.
And the interesting thing in this specific, normally Valve working on video games isn't really news because they tend to work on games and just not release them. This time, Gabe Newell has specifically stated they are working on games that they will be announcing. Not plan to, not might be, but they will be announcing these games. So I am very much looking forward to whatever Valve is doing next. Considering Half-Life Alyx was great, I hope they do some more traditional PC and console games and not just VR stuff from now on. I think they definitely should continue to do VR stuff because Alyx was amazing, but I would like to see a traditional Half-Life game as well if that's happening.
I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see a whole lot of like traditional games from them though, because
Absolutely.
I feel like more so than because they're always pushing tech forward. Like they still make really good, well-designed games, but I feel like more than anything they push tech forward more than like.
And they tend to fully utilize that tech as well.
Oh yeah, not in like a cheap gimmicky way to be clear, but they always do a really good job of like, hey, here's some crazy new tech that no one's ever seen before,
Absolutely.
and then it opens the door for everyone else. They always bring the industry forward. It feels like with every release, like whether it's Portal and it's like crazy, Portal physics, or it was like the AI behind Left 4 Dead or something like that, or the physics for Half-Life. So.
Yep. All right. Our last bit of like nice news before we get into the scandals, because we got some scandals this week. Stardew Valley. Stardew Valley
hooray.
received its 1.5 update a little while ago for PC, and it's been submitted to cert for consoles. So if you were playing Stardew Valley on consoles, you will be getting a free massive update to the game, likely in the next week or two, which is very exciting because that game is made by one person who has continued to give free updates for years, just because he can. So
I mean, the game did really well for him. I don't think he has to do anything.
I think that's what he said, is like he made enough money from it that he was like, I can sit pretty for a long time just making what I want to make. So yeah,
God bless him. Honestly, God bless that man.
Yeah, really, really good job on Stardew Valley, and I'm excited to play that update on my Switch.
And that's a good attitude to have too, where it's like, look, I've made enough money. I'm just gonna make like what I want and continually like update this game. Like that's such a good attitude to have.
And we do know he's working on another game, but that it's going at its own pace and will be ready whenever.
And he's not being, and he doesn't have to be rushed by it at all. You know, so he's just like, whatever.
Also doing Stardew Valley stuff. We also know Binding of Isaac is getting another final DLC. This is like the third final DLC that the Binding of Isaac Rebirth has had. Edmund McMillan has said it would be the final DLC like 3 times, and this is the actual final DLC, maybe. So that's coming out at some point. But now it's scandal time. So Wyatt, we got a couple of big scandals today. And one of them's not really a scandal, but it's a little sad, so we're going to start with that one. Vicarious Visions has been absorbed into Blizzard. So we're still super unclear on what this actually means. Because it's really hard to find up-to-date information from the people at Vicarious as to what is happening. The wording could mean that they are now, like, Vicarious Visions isn't a thing anymore, and it's just Blizzard, which seems pretty likely at this point. It kind of seems like the wording makes it imply that they are just kind of in Blizzard now, but they also don't specifically say anywhere that Vicarious has been shut down as a studio. They just say it's now fully on the Blizzard side and not the Activision side. As formerly Vicarious was more working for Activision than Blizzard, now they are fundamentally on the Blizzard side. And important to note here, Vicarious is a big studio. It's 200 people now, also working with Blizzard. We know that they are now working on, and have been working for a while, on the Diablo 2 remake.
Right.
So what we know from Jason Schreier is that the Diablo 2 remake was being developed by Blizzard's Team 1, which is the Irvine, California team that is known for reworking classic games. Most recently,
they're most like a Blue Point in that regard.
A very poor man's Blue Point. So most recently, they released Warcraft 3 Reforged. And Wyatt, do you remember Warcraft 3's Reforged Giant Trauma, like when it released?
Why, yes, I do, Ryan.
That game disabled the original game. Like, you can't play the original anymore, and there are just things you can't do. And if you want to make mods for Warcraft 3, if you make a mod for Warcraft 3, Blizzard owns that mod, which is the fastest way to kill your modding community, I think. Horrible idea. And yeah, so apparently we now know that the release date for Warcraft 3 Reforged was made a decision by the executives and like never consulted with the development team. And the game released to like a 59 on Metacritic, which is awful. It's a horrendous score. Many of the promised features for that game were not in there. They didn't rework cutscenes like they said they would. They removed content. So it's a little startling, and I think it makes sense as to why they wanted to poach Vicarious to do this, because Vicarious has been on a hot streak. Like, every game they've made recently has been very, very good. The Tony Hawk remakes, the Crash trilogy, all just very high quality. So yeah, now Vicarious has been absorbed, which is good and bad for different reasons. I think we might be seeing some more high quality stuff out of Blizzard because of this.
They're getting a lot of really talented people, for sure.
Absolutely. And it doesn't necessarily mean yet that we won't see any of Vicarious's other projects come to fruition, because it's likely they were working on other stuff as well, and I would be surprised if we don't see any of that in the future. Maybe just coming from the Blizzard team name and not Vicarious anymore, which I'd be totally open to. But at the very least, I think this means Diablo 2's remake is going to be good, which is really nice considering that game like essentially made the action RPG genre what it is. So I'm excited to see their take on that, but I am really, really disappointed we're probably not going to be seeing more Tony Hawk remakes, because man, that was like the highlight of last year for me. Like, such a good remake. So, a little sad if we don't get more of those, but at least Blizzard has some more talented people now that are likely going to be pushing some quality stuff out.
Hopefully.
Yeah. We still, again, we don't have a lot of details on this aside
Because
from the
Blizzard is another dev where it's like they've been kind of striking out a lot recently, whether it's with releases or with just publicity in general. So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see how Overwatch 2 comes out and that sort of thing.
Yep. And we do know now that this is actually another interesting thing that Schreier reported. After the Warcraft 3 remake, they pulled the D2 remake from Team 1 and gave it to Team 3, which is the team that was working on Diablo 4. It is still working on Diablo 4. But that likely means, I'm betting Diablo 4 is going to be getting a bit of a delay because of that. So yeah, I would expect to not see Diablo 4 until after the Diablo 2 remake is my bet. Because I have a feeling they're not going to release these two games back to back, because they'll be eating each other's market share. So yeah. I'm betting
that's almost like releasing two massive open world games within a couple of weeks of each other. Ubisoft. It's almost like you shouldn't do that.
Oh, we'll be getting into that. But yeah, it's a situation of Blizzard. We'll talk more about that whenever we have more details. But as of right now, we don't have a ton. Hopefully we get Diablo and it's good. That'd be nice. All right. So we got another big scandal. And by big scandal, I mean little scandal. But there were two scandals involving Microsoft this week, Wyatt. Two spicy scandals. The first one, because it's a little smaller and easier to talk about, the Microsoft Xbox Instagram account responded to a comment saying that Fall Guys would be coming to Game Pass. And then Fall Guys immediately had to make a ton of clarifications that it is not coming to Game Pass.
What?
So,
excuse me?
This happened last year as well. This happened in December 2019. Control was rumored to be coming to Game Pass and had been confirmed by a Xbox mixer stream. So,
which is funny because it now officially is on Game Pass.
So yeah, what it likely meant at that point is that for some reason, whoever was running that mixer stream or like making the schedule had known that Control would be coming to Game Pass and just didn't realize it was probably under NDA for a while. So
oops.
That was a big oops. We know Control is in Game Pass now. So I would bet that wasn't like a Control recently decided to come to Game Pass. I think it was definitely a situation of it was always going to come to Game Pass. They just announced it too early.
Right.
I have a feeling that's probably the same thing happening with Fall Guys, because as of right now, Fall Guys still likely has an exclusivity agreement with PlayStation. So,
Right.
it seems like whoever is running that Instagram either had insider information or made a really bad mistake, and just announced something that they really shouldn't have announced. So, even if Fall Guys is coming to Game Pass, it's likely not coming for a year. Like, if they're having to confirm that they can't come to Game Pass right now, even if it is coming, it likely won't be for a while. And then it could have certainly been a mistake on the Xbox side. It could have been that person might have seen some wrong information or saw something that was like a different game title and assumed it was Fall Guys. So totally possible that Fall Guys is not coming to Game Pass at all. But it's interesting that this is the second time this has happened. So, yeah, Xbox needs to be a little more careful with their social media, it seems.
Speaking of being more careful, Xbox.
Yeah, just be a little careful. So, Xbox Live Gold is still a thing. It exists. It has existed for a long time. It exists side by side with Game Pass. So for those who don't know, Game Pass and Gold are still separate things, which you probably don't know if you play on PC primarily. And Xbox Game Pass Ultimate includes Xbox Live Gold as well. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate is $15 a month. Xbox Live Gold, they were proposing to increase the price to $11 a month, which is very confusing. Which you would think at first isn't a big increase, because Gold is normally $10 a month, right? So $1, not that bad. But they dramatically increased the price of the monthly things. It used to be, and will remain to be, now that we've got the second announcement of this, that this is not happening. So none of this is actually happening, but they did announce that this was happening, and then immediately retracted it within 24 hours because of the backlash. So the big announcement is that Live Gold would essentially be doubling in price for a year-long membership. Right now and going forward,
$120.
$120 for a year was what it would have been. For those who don't know, Gold has always basically been $60 for a year. Basically always. And they would have doubled that. Even though it only seems like a $1 a month increase, they were changing their pricing structure for the other time things as well. So it was essentially doubling in price if you got that yearly subscription. And at that point, there's no reason to get a year-long subscription if you're only saving $1 if you do that. So it wouldn't have been worth it anyway. But yeah, at this point, they immediately took that back. So this article went live at 6 a.m. At 8:52 p.m. that night, they released a statement that is, "We messed up today, and you were right to let us know."
Sorry, guys, we didn't carry the 4.
So what they did, they immediately retracted the price change, and they also made another change that now free-to-play games will not require Xbox Live Gold. So not only did they walk it back, they walked it back further. This is all very confusing. This is very confusing.
All I can do is just laugh at hearing this.
No one knows why this happened.
Well, I kind of wonder if they did the price increase because they were originally going to do the price increase as well as making free-to-play games not require it. And thus they were going to make it more expensive. So that was already planned.
That makes it worth less.
No, I know. I know.
So there are two prevailing theories right now. The first is that this was just a really bad PR move and they realized it immediately, which is likely the case. The second is that this was a planned PR stunt, which could be the case, but doesn't make a lot of sense, because this is the kind of thing where, like, if it's a planned PR stunt, the day turnaround doesn't really drum up a lot of things. And what people think this actually was they were likely trying to move people from Xbox Live Gold to Game Pass Ultimate.
because
That
Game Pass
was
has been
yeah.
doing really, really well for them.
That was
I feel.
likely their move. And to be honest, it's just still super confusing. Because like now Xbox has 3 separate subscriptions you got to keep track of. So it's still just confusing. But it was just a really, really awkward timing for this. So yeah, it's just super interesting. We don't know if this was maybe what my theory might be is that this was maybe a decision they made pre-COVID and were planning to do anyway, and then had written this up and had it ready and maybe scheduled this blog post to go out and just forgot about it. And maybe had a meeting during COVID to cancel it, and then someone maybe just forgot to cancel the blog post going out. So I could see that happening as well.
That oh man, if that actually.
Either way, nothing is changing at Microsoft, but it is just kind of stunning that this and the Fall Guys things happened within like 24 hours of each other. So yeah, Xbox Live Gold went from being a decent deal to the worst deal in video games, to being even less important now. Yeah, I don't know. It's super confusing. I'm very surprised that I forgot Xbox Live Gold was still a thing. I thought they had already just wrapped it into Game Pass Ultimate. I was wrong. It is still a thing.
Like, that has to be coming down the line at some point.
Yeah, I think that's the assumption, is that Live Gold is likely not going to exist.
In Microsoft's position, that is like the most obvious thing that they could do. The most obvious and probably the best thing they could do in terms of like Xbox's like whole platform right now. Because it's a mess and they just need to unify everything now.
Yeah. So yeah, that was the whole confusing Microsoft saga that happened this week. It was an adventure. We're happy to be on it with all of you. So
a Microsoft related story that's going up in flames, and it has nothing to do with Halo. Wow, look at that.
Yep. All right. So Wyatt, as you know, we always give out an award on this show. Every show we have an award, and this week, Taylor, it's just for you, just for our Ubisoft love.
You shouldn't have.
I have the best Ubisoft game that released in a very close period of each other in 2020. So if you could only play, having played all 3 of them at this point, if you could only play either Watch Dogs Legion, Immortals Fenyx Rising, or Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which would you choose? That's all I want to know.
Immortals.
Immortals? All right. I don't want explanation. I don't want explanation at all. I just want people to know.
Okay.
What
about
you choose Immortals. Hands down Valhalla, but that's because I like Vikings.
That's fair.
And I think the big thing with Legion for me is that it soured itself on me with all the issues I had, as well as like the very clear lack of ambition or lack of fulfilled ambition that it has. Like there's some very clear things in Legion that they wanted to do, I'm betting, but either ran out of time for or it just wasn't working.
I think they were banking on their one big thing to be enough to kind of support everything else.
Yeah, and to me, to be honest, that one big thing isn't quite as advanced as even like the Nemesis system, which at this point is however many years old.
Yeah.
So
like 3 or 4, something like that. 3 or 4 years.
Oh, Nemesis system's older than that at this point. Shadow of Mordor is, I think, a 2015 game.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a while, and I'm kind of disappointed. It was a 2014 game, so it's been 6 years, and we still haven't topped it aside from Shadow of War. So
that being said, I do want them to keep rolling with it though.
Oh, absolutely.
I think it can become something really special because I do think, you know what? I'll just save that until we get into the big Ubisoft.
Well, guess what we're doing right now, Wyatt? We're getting into the big Ubisoft discussion. So,
look at that.
For those of you listening who don't know, Wyatt and I are the only two in our group that tends to play Ubisoft games pretty often. We've all played the big 3 games we're going to be talking about: Watch Dogs Legion, Immortals Fenyx Rising, and Assassin's Creed Valhalla. So I think the best way to tackle this is in the order that I think we all played them, which was Legion, Immortals, Valhalla. So we're gonna go from Legion to Immortals to Valhalla, and kind of talk briefly about each one and our thoughts on it. First of all, I think overall we can say that Ubisoft likely should have staggered their releases a little more.
A lot more.
Yeah.
Lot more.
So I picked up. For those who don't know, Ubisoft has a Game Pass-like thing on PC only called Ubisoft Connect Plus, which lets you play the like ultimate versions of all their games on release for $14 a month, something like that. So I picked that up to play because all of these released within a month of each other, within a full month. So I paid for it once and was able to play all three. And got to play. I put a lot of time into Legion, more time into Valhalla at this point, I think, and then a decent chunk of time as well into Phoenix Rising. And at this point, I think I'm not going to continue that subscription because I'm burnt out. Like that's the big thing with Ubisoft releasing all these games next to each other is it burns you out on open worlds.
I mean, it's the same issue that Titanfall 2 had. It was released like right near another EA game, and it was coming out just before the big Call of Duty, and it's just too much. It was too many shooters in such a short time for people. So,
which like despite how quality all these games are, I think at their base level they're all at least 7 out of 10s. Likely more once the bugs are sorted out.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a shame that everything was so smashed together, especially because Ubisoft doesn't have anything happening for the next like few months now. Because Riders Republic got delayed. We're not seeing.
I'm assuming these games were originally supposed to be more staggered out, right? And they just because of COVID, they all got pushed back, but they had to release those in this fiscal year or something like that. So
yeah,
they probably didn't have much of a choice in the matter. But what you're left with is 3 gigantic open world games, each with a lot of different systems going on, and it's a lot.
Yeah, that does really seem like it's the case. Specifically for me, since we're starting with Legion, I think the big thing with Watch Dogs Legion is that it feels like whenever they did that big restructuring of the game, pretty close to the release, they restructured some back-end elements of the game to make it a little bit more streamlined. I think that was a mistake. What they said they were doing is they wanted to make it feel less like a super progression-heavy Ubisoft game. I think for Watch Dogs, that didn't make sense.
Well, they didn't really have that for Watch Dogs 2, which for context is
Watch Dogs 2 did with the skill tree and that kind of progression.
But what I think happened was that they had more like stat-based stuff going on than and again, I just want to say Watch Dogs 2 is probably one of my favorite Ubisoft games. I adore Watch Dogs 2 so much. And so I was looking forward to Legion just because, to be honest, I couldn't even really play much of the first one. I just didn't like it at all. But no, 2 was great. And this whole, what's the official name of the system? Is like the recruit system or the?
They referred to it as like a social system and the recruit anyone system as 2 separate things.
Okay.
And what I actually think is the most interesting thing in Legion is the social systems, which they don't use very much. So the social system is really, really clever because it makes NPCs important based on the player interacting with them. So if you run over an NPC, you will likely encounter at some point in the future a relative of theirs if you killed them, or them if they've gotten out of the hospital. And then if you interact with them at that point again, they'll keep showing up as recurring characters, which is wonderful. Like it's such a clever system that you tend to see like relatives of people you know. It really reinforces that they put a lot of work into that system.
And also the way that all these NPCs are generated is really interesting because they pick an area of London and then a lot of like where they're specifically placed then kind of influences their daily routines and what kind of personality they're given and stuff like that. So depending on where they're supposed to be hailed from, it kind of like narrows down and then kind of picks the best match for creating a social profile for this person.
It's a really super cool system. The thing that has me really excited about it, they talked about it and said that they designed that system in a way that it's very easily transferable to other games that Ubisoft is going to be making.
Yes.
I cannot wait to see an Assassin's Creed game take advantage of that. Like, man, I would love that so much to see like a historical game using that system. So I'm super excited to see what they do with it. I think Legion, the biggest like misstep in my mind is that it doesn't really show that system off a little more, because you have to kind of actively look for it to notice it. Which means it's working as intended for the most part, but I think they could have done some cool stuff with the recruit anyone, of making that a little bit more dramatic.
There's a lot more potential that wasn't reached with a system like this.
Yeah. Which I think is evidenced by the fact that it's the first game they're doing this, so I definitely don't think it's a big problem with the game.
No, and I see it as like, in a way, it's like no matter how you feel about the game, just because this system is now here and they're planning to use it in more games, I'm
Yeah.
glad it exists just so that this technology can be pushed forward and used on other projects, because I think it's such a cool system. And as we all know, Ubisoft has like completely doubled down on open world games. So anytime they can create this awesome system that makes their open world games better is for everyone else's benefit.
Yeah, and it makes everything feel like a legitimate location, which is I think is the best thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the where that starts to fall apart is how Legion misses a lot of things that were in Watch Dogs 1 and 2. So there's a complete lack of like interior spaces that aren't for combat.
I know Ryan and I talk about this all the time. One of the coolest parts of Watch Dogs 2 for me is, if you want to go and buy some new clothes or something, you had to walk into the shop and you can see like what they're displaying on the outside of the store, but you actually have to walk inside and go talk to the guy and stuff like that. Like just that little bit of extra detail just grounds you in that open world so much more.
It
And they
really
don't
reinforces
have
it being a space, like a location that your character lives in, and knows.
It is nice. It is nice that they still kept, because this is one thing I'm going to be complaining about with Valhalla later.
Yeah,
Is it is very nice that they were able to keep these different uh, sort of like clothing chains that have their own sort of
identity.
style and their own identity. Yeah, they were still able to keep that, which is nice, and I'm going to be talking about that in Valhalla a little later. But yeah, no, that theme is still there, and I think that was a good thing to stick with. But the other thing that's missing that Ryan and I have both talked about a lot is you had this whole like phone UI bit in Watch Dogs 2, where it's kind of a menu where you can pull up like the map or call for like various things. You have apps that you had to download and stuff like that. And it's like you open the little UI is on your screen, but your character is still walking around, but he's just holding his phone out. And so it just does a great job of like, again, grounding you in the open world a little more while giving you all these options. And that's also completely gone. Or even little things like you can download a music app and just listen to tunes from different radio stations and stuff while you're doing
While you're walking around, which is like,
yeah,
it's so confusing as to why that isn't in Legion, especially because, Wyatt, at launch, I don't know if it's still this way because I haven't played the game in a few weeks. The key binding for that menu was called smartphone. It was called the smartphone button. So that was cut content. We know that was cut content. So yeah, it's. I think that's where the game is evidenced a little bit of having been. I don't know if rushed is the right word, because it sounded like they never really were concerned about the game releasing. It was more of there were some restructurings most of the way through the game that seemed to have hurt the product. Yeah. So yeah, I think the big thing that stands out to me is I went back and played Watch Dogs 1 to kind of see, because a lot of people were saying like it's missing a lot of things from older Watch Dogs, and I wanted to kind of make sure I wasn't misremembering things, because I had a ton of fun with Legion. Like I was very much enjoying the game.
Yeah.
And then like minor things started getting me, like the fact there's a limit of 50 people you can recruit, which means you likely won't be recruiting a lot of those like funny characters you see around that are maybe not super strong, because if you're playing with permadeath, that's just weakening you permanently. That's like deciding that I'm going to keep this intentionally bad person in my party, where I could have like another hitman or another drone specialist or something. Which I think like that limit should have been at least like 75 to 100. It really, really needed to be bigger than what it was.
Yeah. No, I completely agree.
Especially because a lot of the characters, you can find like accountants that have passive skills that'll start bringing you passive income. But because of the fact that you tend to not want to use them because of that limit, people likely won't engage with that system, which is very disappointing.
They definitely need
yeah.
to, if they're going to use this kind of recruitment mechanic in more Watch Dogs games, which I hope they do. Like, it's definitely like a flawed system now, but I think, now that they kind of have the groundwork down and they can work on improving it, I really hope they continue with this and kind of flesh it out more.
Use
But
it for something.
yeah, whether it's another Watch Dogs game or something like that. But they really need to tune. I think there should have been something where, because it just feels like they kind of give you everyone with these abilities up front, where I feel like they should kind of tune it to the player's progression, because you just run into so many people that are just not helpful at all. And I kind of wish that they could change, like the
Yeah.
like the perks and the abilities that people have can adapt more over time. And I also feel like, and I remember us kind of disagreeing on this point a little bit, but one thing that I wish is that everyone's roles kind of affected, kind of either limited or gave more options to certain characters in certain ways.
No,
So,
I agree with you on that. I think we just disagreed about how to do it.
like my example, right, is that I kind of wish that uh, some characters just didn't use weapons or just had more harsh like limitations, but also much better benefits to using a character, because it did feel like eventually a lot of characters started feeling very similar to one another. And I just wish that the roles were a lot more defined in that way. And maybe that's just trying, maybe you just got to give the each character more perks or more options or something, but I just wish they were a little bit
Yeah.
more distinct from one another.
I think my big thing is that it doesn't feel like you're a group. I think it's very clear with some of the character archetypes, like the getaway driver, that they likely intended at some point for there to be missions where you were switching between characters actively, because the getaway driver has a useless skill set for any combat in the game, but it's
Especially because
super cool for the open world stuff.
there's no driving missions.
Yeah,
None.
it's bonkers.
Insanity.
Because
Insanity.
the getaway driver has some awesome abilities. You can like Red Sea part the cars to clear a path in the road. There's tons of really awesome stuff, but there's just no incentive to ever use them,
It's
which
like that
is
scene
really
from
disappointing.
Almighty where he just shoves all the cars out of the way. Like,
Like,
it's awesome.
what I'm betting they were planning to do at some point is have like tag team fighting game system of you can swap between like 2 or 3 characters on the fly. Like, I really wish that was in the game, because I think it would have made it feel a lot more like you were playing a squad and not just one person. Because as of right now, the game kind of treats you as a singular protagonist. There's not really it doesn't really pick up anything. Like, it's not, the dialogue isn't different generally depending on your character. And I really wish it was more of a recognition of, like, if you were talk to one person and then you're suddenly a different character and you go talk to that same person, that they maybe acknowledged you're a different person.
I would have. I'm kind of in two minds about this, but it would have been really nice to have like a squad of people to go in with, so you're not just kind of rolling by yourself, right? But it's like, oh,
Yeah.
you've got some AI controlled buddies to go with you. But if you have permadeath on and they're falling in battle and it's not your fault, I could see how that could be really obnoxious.
And the
Either
simple
that,
solution is, like, make them like Elizabeth from BioShock. Just have them not take damage, or
right,
stay out of the firing lane.
right.
And yeah,
You could do that as well.
and the reason we're saying all this is because I think we both really enjoyed the game
Yeah,
and saw a lot of potential. But and back to what I was saying earlier about how it's missing things from older games. Like, I went back and played Watch Dogs 1, and Watch Dogs 1 has like way better and more interesting progression and a lot of really cool hacks that just aren't in Legion, that especially that are in 2. And I'm a little foggier on 2 because I haven't played it as much. I've been meaning to go back and do it. But yeah, Watch Dogs 1, like the blackout hack, tons of really awesome abilities that you just can't use at all in Legion, which is just kind of sad. So,
and here's the biggest, well, one of my biggest disappointments was that one of my favorite parts of Watch Dogs 2 was how detailed the NPCs are, not just from when you like profile them, but also the different activities that they're doing, right? They were so like in depth and crazy. Like, I was just walking on the beach, right? And then there was a couple that there was someone that proposed to his boyfriend, right? And it was this whole thing, and a whole crowd of people came around and was like cheering them on, and they were like, "Oh my god, I'm so happy!" They were hugging each other, and then they go off and like called their parents to talk about it, and it was just it was a whole scene, and you could just walk away from it because it's just some like NPC like window dressing, but it was so detailed and it was so interesting, and just you would see those little like interactions with NPCs everywhere, and that's just like
It's also stuff like just
non-existent.
reading text messages and whatnot.
Yeah, or little like phone call, like bits of phone call and stuff like that. Just all of that like cool window dressing was just gone. And they did somewhat make up for it because they give you, when you profile someone just through text and menus, they do give you the most amount of information, which is nice. Again, it's nice window
But
dressing.
it's missing that narrative element, right? That character
Yeah,
development element.
it's like, well, it's because it's interesting to see like, okay, what we have in Legion is like the setup for a character, but then the text messages, the phone calls, and all of the interactions in the actual open world is like, here's this character, here's what we're gonna do with them, and just
Yeah,
seeing them in action rather than just reading about them, is disappointing. You need that like, here's the character, here's how they react with everyone else. It just
absolutely.
doesn't happen. And I get that that's really technically complicated to accomplish, but that's why I'm saying
It just
I
feels like
want
a regression because we had those things. Like they were
yeah.
working, and they're not in Legion. And that's not to
It's
say that Legion
definitely
feels content light or anything, but it is noticeable.
no, no. And the other thing too is there's a lot of people that are like, "Oh, it's like it kind of boring because you can just run in and just do like whatever. There's no." The thing is, it's one of those games that you have to actively engage in its different
Yeah,
systems and that's where it becomes really interesting because I will say a downside, I think to almost every Ubisoft game is that their AI is never they have all these cool systems and mechanics going on that are all like interlocking into place and it's really cool, but their AI has always struggled to make those systems interesting or useful. I feel like
yeah.
that's such a constant problem where it's like their AI is just so dumb that you can just run in and just shoot everyone with a shotgun and call it a day, and you don't have to do all these interesting things. But if you take the time and slow down and like use your hacks a little bit more and set up a ton of traps, it's so cool. It's just you wish that the AI was kind of pressuring you to make those moves more
Yeah,
often rather
and
than you
and
having to do it
Legion
yourself.
has the problem with that where it kind of encourages you to always use certain subsets of skills on characters. Like you almost always want a character with a spider bot because the spider bot occasionally you'll enter an area and just be unable to access things without a spider bot.
There's almost never an area that doesn't use a spider bot. Like
It's always just
it's
like
crazy.
it legitimately feels like maybe the spider bot should have just been a standard part of kit.
Yeah.
And what I would have made unique is have the one that can stun people be a unique thing to certain
Or the one that can
characters.
like double jump because you can upgrade the spider bot
Yeah,
to do a lot of crazy things.
and it just feels like that piece of equipment is so much more useful than like the stun grenade.
Or the dodge ability for hitmen. As cool
Yeah.
as it is, you know me, I like a good dodge button, but it's not as useful as a spider bot in like
Well, I mean,
every
you can take
situation.
the spider bot and the dodge button because the spider bot is a set of like
That's right.
gear.
That's right. See, I haven't
Um,
played in a minute, so I'm trying to
yeah,
remember.
it
Like,
just like of all the gear, the spider bot is almost always what you're going to be using because it's if you get to an area and like there's a mask that's hidden behind a door that you can't access, but a spider bot can.
yeah.
So you're missing out on collectibles a lot of the time if you don't, which is just weird design in my mind. And kind of discourages you from using anything besides that or the construction drone. Like the construction characters are insane because of that
Yeah.
drone that can let you fly.
And also their melee weapon is
Yeah,
really it hits like a truck. It's insane.
and I don't think the balance issues are a huge problem in the game, but there are certain things that I think like Watch Dogs 2 proved they can definitely balance a game pretty well. So it would have been nice to see them maybe shift some of those things around and give people like a universal dead sec abilities that are like you're dead sec, right? You have the ability to use a spider bot, or maybe if your character can't use a spider bot, have someone at the base that's like remote VPNing, not VPNing. That's not what that does, but like remote connecting in to control that. So use
Right.
that squad system.
Right.
Like I would have loved if maybe getting certain characters permanently unlocks things. Like if you get a hitman, you permanently unlock like whatever their weapon is. So anyone that knows how to use a pistol can now use that weapon.
Mhm.
Because like to me, it doesn't make sense that you can have characters that have like a pistol, but for some reason they always have that one pistol and not another pistol, despite them not being different at all in function. Just like it's like why can my hitman? I can get a hitman that has either a silenced pistol or a regular pistol. They both
Mhm.
exist, but I can't swap between them. Um, on a character, which is a little weird because there's
I will
no
s-
difference.
I will say, kind similar on that note, one thing that I got so obsessed with is there are a lot of different clothing pieces that you can purchase, and because there's so many characters to customize, if you're like me and you just love you'll spend hours customizing characters, you will spend so much time buying different clothing pieces for all your different agents, and that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I almost did the opposite. I tended to recruit people based on if they had like a cool style. Like I found one dude that I think is still the most fun character I've had, who had like the Death Wish stat and the Kung
Mhm.
Fu stat. So he would run around. I just played him like a crazy Kung Fu action hero, knowing that he like at any moment could totally just drop dead, but just run into places and use the like Kung Fu strikes is super fun.
Mhm.
If you get into that character mindset of the different characters you're playing, I think it's a lot of fun. But
And I started doing things like I showed you a picture of this a while ago, but
yeah,
I got like a driver who had a lot of driving stats, and then I just made him look like a baby driver. Like I just had so much fun with the customization. And again, it helps that every store has a different theme, and so you kind of have to put in some effort and travel around to the different spots, which was really nice.
yeah. So
Felt
I
like you were
think
going out on a shopping day.
I think overall our opinions on Watch Dogs Legion are that it certainly is missing some stuff, and I really hope they do release some updates down the line, like with DLC, that will make that a little bit better. Because they certainly have opportunities too, but there are like more systemic issues with it that I think a sequel will be what fixes it, and not Legion itself. Like the lack of any kind of skill based progression to your actual characters, especially like a design skill tree. Because going from Watch Dogs 2, which has this really cool looking like radial skill menu
Hmm.
that is like fully all just useful skills for different areas of the game, like missing that just feels really weird, because it often feels like you can do a like enemy camp or something and just you don't come away with anything.
It's one of the first like Ubisoft open world games that's come out in a while that doesn't have that skill tree. Because if there's one thing that I always like about an Ubisoft game is that they have some really cool skills that you can unlock that like really changes the way you interact with the open
And
world, and it just
especially
wasn't
Watch
here.
Dogs. Like Watch Dogs has always had that.
Yeah,
Um,
another good example. Far Cry 5 had a lot of really cool skills to unlock, like the hand gliders and being able to like
yeah.
rappel up cliff faces and stuff. And it's just not here. And with a game like Watch Dogs, there's so many opportunities to have really cool
Man, going back to Watch Dogs 1, I think
skills.
one thing that like let them get crazy with some overpowered hacks is that you had to craft them. And you could have like a limited number. So like if you had to make a blackout, you had to find the stuff to make a blackout hack. And so you
Mhm.
knew when you were using it that you were expending resources. And I think that was a very fun
Yeah,
aspect of playing that game, is like you have to balance that.
yeah, yeah.
But we do need to move on to talk about
Mhm.
our other games, because we've been talking about Legion for a while. I think overall we summed our opinions pretty well up when we did the Game of the Year awards. And
It's a 7. It's a
swimming in
7.
sevens, it almost is an 8. If it didn't have all the bugs and it just was a little bit more polished, I think it could have pushed that. But it's missing a lot of like minor things from
It's missing a
older
lot of the
games.
Watch Dogs stuff.
Yeah, like I think in their push to make it unique, they took away a lot of the things that made Watch Dogs what Watch Dogs was.
Yeah.
And I think
Which
Ubisoft
was it was
kind of
their
took
like
the
their
wrong
yeah.
things out when they were
Well,
considering that.
it's their GTA, right? And I feel like
Yeah,
a lot of the cool things that grounds players into the world in GTA were in previous Watch Dogs games, and they were just removed here,
yeah, and also
or they
things that
didn't have time.
separated it from GTA, like the skill trees and whatnot, are now just missing.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it has less of an identity, which is sad considering that Legion is so much about identity and like having
yeah,
that group.
yeah.
But yeah, I'm excited to see what Watch Dogs does next. But
Or at least where the tech of Legion
yeah,
goes.
absolutely.
I think.
I would love to see them use it in a historical setting. Like, man, I would love to get like a another urban Assassin's Creed using the
Hmm.
social systems would be super cool.
Hmm.
But yeah, moving on. Let's talk about Immortals a little bit.
Yeah. Out of all three that came out, this one was my favorite, and I think that's just because I feel like it's the most consistent quality out of the three. Like the threes have like peaks and valleys, where I feel like this game really kind of is a lot more consistent. in its design, and again, its overall quality. It's probably the most focused, uh, most like realized Ubisoft game that I've played in a while. Is a good way to put it, at least for me.
Yeah, I think I had pretty similar opinions. The big thing with me, I dropped Immortals relatively quickly because I wanted to focus on Valhalla and knew if I played both, I would burn out 100%.
Like me.
Yeah.
Because I did finish both for some reason.
And I think with Phoenix Rising, the big things that stuck out to me are it does feel a lot like Breath of the Wild, which I think is a good thing. It nails a lot of the aspects of that like map exploration, especially the world design in Phoenix Rising is just really
Excellent.
fun.
I think out of all 3 games, we can both agree it has the best world
Oh
design.
yeah, super visually striking, like color everywhere. I'm just happy to see
area
vibrant
is so
sections.
each area is so like visually distinct from one another too, which is great to see.
Which I think is where it starts to get a little weird for me because for me the character designs in Phoenix Rising just don't do it. Like
I don't like them.
It's
at
something
all.
about the
They remind me-
proportions is just off to me.
What they remind me of more than anything is those Xbox avatars, like the updated ones that came out a
Yeah.
few years ago, and they just look off-putting. I don't like them. Yeah.
And I also think it's like, for me, I made a character that all the time just this like weird sickly green around the eyes, and you can't get rid of it because there's no like makeup option. So it was driving me insane, and I think it was tied to skin color, which is just weird because like it's green. It's like a green eyeshadow that doesn't look good. It was driving me insane in all the cutscenes.
To be clear, I have no idea what he's talking about. He's shown me pictures and I've seen it, but I have no idea what he's talking about. That wasn't a problem.
I think it's
for
specific
me.
to the female character. I don't know why.
Because I played the female version for most of the game, actually.
Yeah, then I think it must be skin color that's doing it or something.
Interesting.
But it's weird. It's just a super odd thing. And yeah, I think a lot of the character design is just a little bit like Clash of Clans-y in a weird way.
That's a good way to put it. I think it's a mix of Clash of Clans and the Xbox avatars is a good way to put it. I think that's like,
which is just like not that it's a bad style, but it doesn't appeal to me, and
I don't like it.
It makes me take the game less seriously.
Well, I mean, you're not supposed to take it that seriously.
I know, but like less seriously than I think it wants me to.
That's fair.
I would say it's starting to get like on par with like Lego games, which is not what the game wants to be.
That's about how seriously I took it, to be honest with you. Like even without the character design, I think the game does not take itself seriously enough. Well, I think it takes itself seriously enough for the kind of tone it's going for.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it's a problem. That's not serious.
No.
But I do think
it's refreshing, actually. for an Ubisoft game.
I do think a big thing that probably is why a lot of people kind of bounced off Immortals and why it hasn't gotten as much hype as I think it probably deserves is that they kind of build it so closely with Breath of the Wild that it might have set up bad expectations for some people, myself included, because I think when a lot of people think of Breath of the Wild, they love that open world like sandbox puzzle approach, like almost Hitman-esque approach to combat, where you use the environment to your extreme advantage. And I think like we do have games that are doing that, like Genshin Impact. That's what Genshin Impact's combat is.
I would say even Watch Dogs Legion is a better example of using the environment.
Absolutely, actually, I would definitely agree. It's something that I think you would find more in Legion, Hitman, and obviously like Breath of the Wild itself. Whereas Phoenix Rising, the combat plays more similarly to like a generic action game.
It plays like Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I think more so than anything else. It's what it reminded me of.
With some Breath of the Wild abilities thrown in. Like you do have your weird magic abilities that you can use. And I think the biggest thing for me as to why I bounced off of it was not any specific aspect of the combat, but the animations to me just had no weight. And like normally in games, you tend to have an option to swap a weapon around. That's why like when I play Valhalla, I've been using the heavy weapons because their animations have so much impact to them.
Oh yeah, the
Whereas,
sound design is
oh
excellent.
yeah, in Phoenix Rising, it feels very like almost JRPG anime esque. Which,
Yeah.
like, I should write a video of Tales of Berseria, I think it was, and
Mhm.
the combat like strike animations are pretty similar across both,
Very, very
and it's
similar.
just a little bit like it lacks impact. And I think for a lot of people that's not a problem, but
It's less
coming
of a problem for
from
me.
yeah,
I know where you're coming from, and I definitely notice it, but it is less of an issue for me.
it's also not going to stop me from playing the game. Like I want to stress that that's not the reason I stopped playing the game. The reason is because I wanted to play Valhalla and don't have the time for both. Like it's not
Right.
that I'm not planning to play the game more. It's just I think if you really want like a combat oriented game, Phoenix Rising might not tickle that itch.
Although I will say I prefer Phoenix's combat over Valhalla's, and we're gonna get into why when we get into Valhalla.
Yeah.
But I did prefer this over Valhalla
I think
personally.
Phoenix has more interesting combat, but Valhalla has more weighty combat. Is how
It
I would
came
put it.
down to I don't even want to call them bugs, but I'll talk about it when we get there. But this felt very fluid to me. It didn't feel very like
Oh yeah.
animation heavy, which I think I usually prefer. Um, and I was getting to that point where I was like, yeah, there isn't a whole lot of variety to combat, and then I started to unlock more and more abilities and move sets and combos and stuff. And by the end, there's so many tools for you to play with in terms of like combos and you can kind of develop different, strategies for whatever you're fighting and stuff. So for me, and you have a lot more experience in melee combat systems than I do, but for me, I was unlocking so many cool things very much near the end of the game that kind of kept me because I was kind of starting to burn out and then I unlocked all these things and then I kind of kept going because it got the combat just after a certain like hour mark just got so much more interesting and a lot more
Yeah.
fun. Because there are some combos that I've pulled off, and I think I have clips. I should send you some because some of the clips I have saved are super cool
Yeah.
when you string
I
it together
think
properly.
that's where for me, I the big thing that kind of took the satisfaction out of that for me is that most of those abilities are like button press combos and
Mhm,
not button press combos, but like hold a button and then press another button and you'll instantly do it.
mhm.
Which I don't have a problem with. It's just I tend to prefer more like true combo Devil May Cry style where you need to actually like perform an input that has
Right.
advantages and disadvantages. And Valhalla's not like that either. Like Valhalla doesn't have those. It still does the one button thing. But I think that's part of why the combat wasn't as engaging to me.
Not that it's worse. It's just a preference.
Yeah, it's like if you're playing the game for like depth to combat, Devil May Cry is more you're sweet, which
Right.
I
Right.
don't think is to the surprise of anyone.
Right.
But Phoenix Rising, yeah, great world design. The humor, I think, is where the game gets a little bit more divisive.
I think it hits more than it misses, personally.
Yeah, I would
Um,
agree, but I definitely
and
think it's going to depend on who you are.
yeah, it's very like Marvel quippy sort of like
The entire game is like that as well. Like it doesn't let up, which
ever. Yeah. If anything, there's certain moments where it just doubles down a lot. um and I liked it personally because like if because part of this discussion is we're kind of comparing all three of these games to each other because we played them in such like a
a
short
short
amount of
time
time.
span.
It so helps to like and I kind of said this already, but like it's such a nice change of pace for an Ubisoft game to just not take itself seriously. Like I think the
Yeah,
last time there was an Ubisoft game that was just kind of treated itself almost like a joke was Mario and Rabbids, and it worked really. The humor there worked well for a lot of that game as well. And I think here it like hits more than it misses, and even if it misses, it's like you're almost having fun with like how cringy it is sometimes.
yeah,
You know, um,
yeah. You can laugh at it sometimes. Sometimes you'll laugh with it. Sometimes you'll laugh at it, but you'll still be laughing.
yeah.
So
Also, it is by far the most like technically proficient game in terms of like performance and bugs and that sort of thing. Now we did play on different platforms. I played on PS5 where
I still had the least
didn't
issues by far out of the three.
it didn't crash once. There wasn't like a single dropped frame, at least not that I could tell while I was playing. No, like just noticeable bugs or anything. It was kind of wonderful, actually.
Yeah.
I can't remember the last Ubisoft game that was like that ran that well or like just as technically proficient. Like that was really well done. And if I could also say one thing in comparison to Valhalla, if there's one thing that this game gets right, is that it adds a stamina meter when you're climbing, which was a very Breath of the Wildy thing to do. Not that I'm saying that Assassin's Creed needs a stamina meter, but it needs something when it comes to climbing, which I guess we'll get to when we talk about Valhalla. But I thought the stamina meter here worked really well. The only thing that I didn't like was for some reason your stamina lowers when you sprint, and if you're playing on a controller, you sprint by holding your X button or your square button, which either means that you have to dodge first and then you run, and then you have to hold down the square button or the X button.
It's also got a super weird animation as well.
Yeah.
Like, that animation was always kind of bothering me.
And I don't understand why sprint was square when clicking it when like L3 or you're clicking in the left stick does absolutely nothing the entire game. It's like you have the button that every single game uses for its sprint, unless you're like Rockstar or something. That is your sprint button, and you are not using it for anything, which is so bizarre.
Especially because there are a lot of times where you want to be able to control your camera and sprint at the same time, and you just can't. Like, there's not an option to do that.
Yeah, that was very odd, and I was like, how did no one notice that? But the other thing I do want to talk about, I don't really want to talk about the story as a whole too much, because in this game,
we don't really have time to hit the story.
It really doesn't matter. But I will say there are some, because a lot of them are like kind of arcs related to various like
gods and goddesses,
Greek gods, right? Some of them are weird and kind of don't make sense. Like the Aphrodite arc is so weird, and it feels like you're doing a bad thing. It's very weird. But then you have others like the Hephaestus arc, which was great.
Yeah.
And it just felt like there were two completely different writers in those sections. It was very strange.
It definitely feels like at some points the game is trying to play into the whole Greek god vibe of them being super arrogant and like self-absorbed and trying to play into that, but at the same time it like doesn't explain that to the player at all.
It also tries to humanize them and have you like kind of relate to them or have you feel bad for them, and it just like doesn't work. It's really weird.
A little weird. But
the only
overall,
other thing,
very good.
Very good. The only other thing I'll mention is both Ryan and I were not a huge fan of like the visual design of a lot of the armor sets.
Yeah.
There's just the only one I liked was the Eagle Bearer one, which you get as like a free. No, you have to like pay a few Ubi coins or whatever, and that's literally just the armor set from Assassin's Creed. And I thought that was the only one that I like legitimately liked.
A lot of them are just very Clash of Clansy, I think is the right word.
They're too gaudy.
It's not that they're too flashy. They're too like ostentatious, like garish almost.
Yeah. Because I usually prefer more like simple, understated type of stuff, and that's just me. And so there really wasn't an armor set that like satisfied that, I guess.
Well, it's like I want to use an armor set that looks like it belongs in a Greek setting, and I'm okay with it being a little flashy and a little bit like godly inspired. But when you've got like Warhammer size shoulder plates on
and
this like tiny character,
that are bigger than your feathers that are longer than your legs,
especially with like the proportions of the character and whatnot, it just doesn't really work. So I think that could use a little work, but again, I think we both definitely enjoyed the game. I'm looking forward to going back to it at some point.
Avoid. And I also just want to say the big thing before we move on, it trims out so much of the Ubisoft fat. There's so much less grinding, and there's just so much less time spent doing just random things. It's so
And you can
much
like
more
totally
like
rush
focused.
the actual narrative stuff in that game. It doesn't box
Yeah.
you out from doing things.
Any amount of like, oh, I have to go farm some resources and stuff feels like it's part of your journey and not that you have to actively go out of your way
So
to
I
do
will
it.
say the other final thing that bothered me was that there were like 4 different currency resources. And none of
It
them
got
are
a little
like paid
confusing.
currency. It's just like it feels like that could have been better contextualized instead
I
of
did
just
like
being
I did
different
kind
currencies
of
essentially.
I did kind of like them because each one has their own sort of like mini game associated with it.
Well, I like that, but I don't like the currency themselves. Like I don't like that they're like the visual design of those different sections of your menu looks like a mobile game currency, right?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it doesn't feel very satisfying when you open a chest that you just did this big shrine to get,
The
and
whole
it's
game
just like
has a mobile game kind of feel
it just
to it, to
explodes
be
into
honest.
like a bunch of like crystals that I'm just like, what?
The whole visual design feels very mobile gamey. Although the environments are great, it's mostly, I guess, the
Yeah.
characters that just like are bizarre.
It's just weird. It's those weird little elements of it feels like someone looked at like Clash of Clans and was like, this is good. We need this
I
in
would give
home
this,
console
yeah.
gaming.
I think in comparison to Legion, I would give this a solid like 8.
Yeah,
I think
it's
that's a good spot
about where
for
I
it.
would put it as well. I definitely really enjoyed it. I think the narrative is going to be the most hit or miss part of the game.
Hmm.
But a lot of the gameplay itself felt great. Like the movement feels really satisfying most of the time.
Yeah.
As long as you're not trying to like boost glide or sprint,
Yeah.
feels good.
Yeah.
But yeah, all right, moving on because we gotta talk a bit about Valhalla. We're already getting
Oh
pretty
boy.
deep into this, so
Yep.
we're gonna have to probably cut off a little bit of what we would have said about Valhalla just for timing's sake. So I think the big thing I wanted to say with it is that I really like a lot of the stuff that they've done with like the aesthetics and especially the combat animations are really solid this time around.
Oh, they are awesome.
All the finishers are just fantastic. Like every weapon has at least like 3 or 4 different finishers you can do that are just so built into the combat.
After last week's episode, I like there was like I streamed a YouTube video to you and to Alex, just showing you guys some of like the finishers in the game.
They're
And
so
we were
satisfying.
we were sitting there. It was like watching a Marvel movie and opening. Everyone was just like, oh, we were like freaking
Yeah,
out.
they're just
It was
super
awesome.
cool. I think the only other game that like has that level of quality to the finishers is like Shadow of War and Shadow of Mordor. I think have really good
Doom's
finishers.
Doom's like
Oh, Doom's on another level though.
yeah.
Doom is an entirely different level. We can't compare this to Doom. But yeah, I think in general for a melee combat game, super satisfying. And I think for me that's a huge part of why I enjoy it so much is that like the animations just feel good when they happen.
My problem with the combat. There are so many moments where it just misses your button inputs. And
Yeah.
it is so I cannot tell you how many times I like wanted to huck my controller across the room because it's like, oh, I want to dodge or I want to parry and it just doesn't register it at all and so it just feels so unresponsive sometimes.
Yeah, I think what they wanted to do is almost move a little bit more towards not Souls direction, but like that Sekiro combat weight of where things you have to commit to an action, right? I don't think that works for Assassin's Creed.
No, and there's never a moment where I was confident in me controlling the character in combat. Like and it always felt because when I was playing Immortals, for instance, it felt effortless. It's like, okay, when I parry, when I dodge, when I attack, I know what's gonna happen. Whereas it feels like I'm constantly wrestling with the controls in Assassin's Creed, and I'm never like confident in what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And that's such a turnoff for me because it's like, all right, I'm fighting this big, like hulking guy, and he does his like rune attack, and I want to dodge, and I just don't dodge. I just sit there. It's so, it's so frustrating.
Yeah, it definitely feels like, especially I think dodging in general, the timing is a little weird. And it's also
it fell off. Yeah.
I think the reason it stands out so much is that a lot of the combat almost feels like it's designed pretty heavily for like one-on-one fights. But most of the game is fighting like 4 to 5 enemies at a time.
there's giant like raids and sieges where you're fighting more than that too.
Yeah, and like it's not that it feels bad when you're doing that, but there are certainly
The actual
moments.
impacts and feedback is great,
Yeah.
but it just feels like your controller disconnects for a split second. It's just it was so there was legitimately a moment where I felt like my controller wasn't working.
What
There
I
were
think it
moments.
probably is, it feels like moves have too much end lag. Like at the end of their animation, you still can't like cancel into a dash or something, which it really feels like you should
Yeah.
be able to do.
Because I
Uh,
mean, there was a moment where I was fighting one of like what are they called, wardens, or they're called like the something or other, the big like level 90 guys that are running around,
yeah,
right? I was fighting one that was like way under leveled than where I was at the time, and the guy kicked my ass because I kept wanting to dodge or parry, and it just wasn't happening. So I was just taking hits constantly. Like I was well near the end of the game at this point, and I was fighting someone that was level 90, and he absolutely wiped the floor with me because the controls were just not responding at all. And it
yeah,
was
it's a
so
little
frustrating.
odd. I think they definitely. It feels like they wanted to not let you cancel into dodges when you really need to be able to do that. The way the combat is almost designed,
Yeah,
which is
it
just a
wasn't
little awkward.
designed to be that way, and that kind of carries over to climbing too, which is
Yeah,
probably the clumsiest it's ever been.
which is weird because it's
Honestly,
also the floatiest it's ever been. Like
yeah, yeah,
it's the
it wasn't. It
most
didn't feel good at
the
all.
least restricted, but at the same time, that kind of feels worse in a lot of scenarios.
It felt better in Odyssey, and even with the older control system, like I think Unity probably has the best climbing in any
Yeah,
Assassin's Creed game.
and like
It's
something I
excellent.
always love in Assassin's Creed is like running up to a wall, seeing that like brick that's spaced out a little bit that you know you can grab onto, and that's how you scale the wall. Here, you just run up to a wall and scale it wherever you want. Like,
It's very Breath of the Wild or it's very Immortals, which would be fine if there was something like a stamina meter to make it more challenging.
and to
But
be
there
honest,
isn't.
like I don't think Assassin's Creed should go the stamina meter direction.
No,
Like, it
I don't
really
either.
feels like they should stay in that.
But what it feels like is that they have that kind of climbing just without the stamina meter.
Yeah.
So they either need to have the stamina meter or they need to go back to something like the older Assassin's Creed games where you actually have to look to where you're climbing before you actually do
So I
it.
think it was a lot of fun in the older ones. It's like how a lot of the climbing sections, like the spires and whatnot, were just puzzles.
Yeah,
Like you had
or
to
even
look around and
I mean,
explore.
or even if you play Syndicate, because I don't know if you ever played
Yeah, I did.
Assassin's Creed Syndicate, but like the zip line in that was so much fun. Like the grappling hook was awesome. And yeah, it may have taken out a lot of the climbing sections, but there are still plenty of moments where you wanted to do some parkour and some climbing. But like if you wanted to get to the top of a building quickly, that option was there and it was super cool. Whereas here it's just you have Breath of the Wild's climbing without the stamina meter, so you just have the worst of both worlds in that respect because
Yeah.
it's too liberating, I guess.
Well, it's
Is
because there's
a
not
good way to
any
put it.
challenge to it at all. Like you
Yeah.
always know you can always get to every point essentially.
And they have to go out of their way. It's like, oh, if you want to go to this castle, we have to like really go out of our way to make sure you can't climb it with like the wooden
Yeah,
poles and
it feels
stuff
like they
like that.
contrive locations to make sure you can't climb them instead of
Yeah.
them being instead of like making it so that climbable spaces are very readable. It's now the non-climbable spaces that you have to read,
Yeah.
which I don't like. Um, okay, and I think with me the biggest thing with Valhalla that's a little off-putting is that the game itself has all this like conquering and whatnot that you do of England. That's the big
Mhm.
central conceit at the start is that you're taking over England essentially.
Right.
And I think the reason this hits a little bit differently for me than it does Wyatt is that I play a ton of like Crusader Kings and Mountain Blade, which are games with the same goal essentially. But you have a
Mhm.
lot more leeway in how you do it. Whereas here, whenever you're doing those missions, it's very narrative, very like there's always a specific path to victory. And I think
Mhm.
that's a little misleading sometimes if you look at the like way the map is displayed and whatnot. It might make you think it's going to be more like a Mountain Blade scenario where you kind of can approach them from any angle. You can approach them in kind of any order you want, but you still do have to do those main missions and those narrative reasons for everything.
It's more of a backdrop, like a
Yeah.
visual backdrop than it is like a mechanic and it's or a
Which
system.
once I got past that, I started enjoying it a lot more. I think it just you have to take that in as what it is and like accept that it is more akin to like Assassin's Creed liberating the different areas in Syndicate than it
Yeah.
is like Watch Dogs Legion,
Which
with how you can
which
approach the burrows on their own.
it's an Assassin's Creed game, so that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, not a bad thing.
You know?
It's not a bad thing. I think it's just the way they advertise some of that is a little bit misleading as to that. And if you go in with that expectation, it will hurt your enjoyment.
Like the whole alliance map part of it just feels like unnecessary. Like it didn't need to be presented this way. Because there really isn't a point to present it in the way that there's like, oh, I got to go talk to Ranvi to go to the alliance map and put down. It's like that didn't need to be there. Like,
it's like that made sense in Dragon Age Inquisition.
Yeah.
When you were specifically like making decisions about what areas to do things in. But here, like, you're going to end up doing all of it anyway. So there's all this pageantry surrounding it that feels a little bit unnecessary.
With that being said, there were quite a few of the arcs individually that I really enjoyed. And yes, a lot of them have a similar formula of this guy needs to become an elderman or this person needs to get to this position of power. And so that's the basis for a lot of them. But I still really enjoyed the individual arcs because they had either some kind of, kooky or fun characters, or they had some legitimately interesting drama going on, or just some fun individual missions. Like there was always something to enjoy in all of them, I think.
And I think a huge difference here from Odyssey is that the dialogue writing is way better.
My lord. The difference it makes.
Characters are fairly consistent. They talk in ways that humans talk.
There's some like good banter, some well-written lines between characters. And it helps because I forget his name off the top of my head, but he was the writer for Assassin's Creed 4.
I forget his name
which was very similar in that I feel like the overarching story is like less important than the characters, and all of the character interactions in that game were great.
Yeah.
And so it's great to have him back writing, and I think he needs to be more involved in this series because I think he's doing a lot of good things with the writing.
Overall, way better than Odyssey, and like not to say that Odyssey was particularly awful, but it certainly was at some point, it stood out when it was bad. And here, I haven't encountered a moment where any of the audio is like so poorly written or something that I'm actually taken out of anything. There's been like one or two poorly written side characters, but like they don't matter. It's a short side quest. But all the main stuff has just been pretty high quality throughout.
Yeah. And I would say like voice acting doesn't see the same amount of improvement, but I would still say it's an improvement as well.
I'd say it's more consistent, at least. Like Odyssey had a few characters that were just awful.
Yeah, where you're like, how did you get a job?
Whereas at least most of the other characters, I haven't found a character that just has a bad voice yet. I found characters with weird voices, like the kid who does the fisherman's hut sounds a little weird.
Oh, yeah.
But I think that's because it's a kid, and it probably is like an adult person voicing them. That's likely why. It did feel
occasionally like people were talking weirdly, very slowly, and like weirdly articulate. Like I always remember like the blacksmith in your town, Gunnar. He just had this weird way of like speaking where he felt very like slow and articulate for no reason at points. It was very odd. I don't know. But
overall a lot more consistent than Odyssey.
Definitely. I will say I'm not going to give away the ending, but it kind of just falls flat for me.
Which it often seems like has been the case with a lot of Assassin's Creed games.
It just doesn't nail that ending, like
where it kind of seems like they're just averse to having a true ending, like actually having an ending.
Yeah, there's the big problem, and I was explaining this to Ryan a couple of days ago. The big problem is that there's no like if you play something like Mass Effect 3, the crescendo, it's all building up to that ending, and it's like epic at the end.
And even in like Mass Effect 2, which is the midpoint of the trilogy, there's a huge build up to that final confrontation. Yeah. Even if though it's not the final confrontation, it's still super important.
And it's all about the pacing and the ramping up of that tension, right? Whereas here, it's just like it starts to, and then it just stops, and then an ending just kind of comes in out of nowhere, and then another ending you're supposed to care about comes in out of it. It's so weird the way that they delivered, because there's kind of 3 different endings to like 3 different parts of the game. I'm not going to give away anything, but it was just weird, and it was not handled well at all, which was very disappointing, especially when you're like me and you decided to do all of the you decided to align with all the areas and finish the story, and it takes you like 150 hours or something to just end like that. It
Yeah.
was actually kind of frustrating. But
I think it's certainly fair. I think that's the one complaint that's been pretty universal is that Valhalla feels bloated.
it is
Like
so
so much. Not to say
so
that any of the
long.
content is like bad. It's just it takes
True.
so long to get to an ending that you probably are going to lose motivation partway through.
It was kind of shocking, actually, just like how
It's like this game is longer than
bloated.
Persona 5. Like Persona
Yeah.
5 is often heralded as a game that's super hard to get into because it's long, and that game takes like 80 hours to finish.
And like I said, I want to say, being conservative, I want to say like 130 to 140 hours, right? And that was me like beelining the story
Yeah, and
because you
I'm
have to
like 8
stop in
hours in,
between.
I think, and I am just about to finish like conquering my first area.
Yeah,
Like that's just the first section.
they really needed to cut out some of the other arcs,
Or move some
right?
of them to be optional. Like
Yeah.
that's what it really feels like. It's not necessarily that they need to cut
Well, no,
content.
let's say no.
but
Let's cut. No. I say they should, because then they don't have to accommodate so much, and they can make a much more they can make a much more focused open world.
Yeah, I get
Because
that. I have a feeling the way Ubisoft is structured, that's not what would have happened anyway. I think what was likely the case is that a lot of different people were working on different sub stories here. That's my bet.
which
Is that the way they
explains
divvied
the
up a lot of
varying quality
yeah.
at times.
I think
guess.
that's probably what was happening. Is it was different teams assigned to different sections.
Because the other thing to point out, Valhalla is the exact opposite to Immortals in terms of there is just it feels so bloated. Like, not only do you have all of England, right? You also have the starting area in Norway, which is its own sort of
And this
mini
is
open
where,
world section.
fair warning, we're about to get into mild spoilers. We're not going to
Mhm.
say the big spoiler that Wyatt and I discussed earlier. We're not going to do that right now because we just don't have the time.
Right.
But minor
'Cause
spoilers
that's
for
its own
gameplay.
thing. That's its own thing. Yeah. Then there's an entire area in Vinland or Newfoundland, or which is like basically United States, right? So there's a whole modern day
It's
United
like
States,
New
what is
England
considered.
area-ish. New England to
Yeah.
upper
It's
Canada.
actually it's supposed to be where, Assassin's Creed 3, it's kind of around that area.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Then you also have this other sort of, I'm going to call it a dream sequence open world section.
Yeah. That's the one we
That
don't
is
want to
its
spoil.
own. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm just saying it's a dream sequence that is its own open world section. That's all I'm
Yeah.
going to say.
That's why we're being a
And
little like less specific on that, is so you can, if you're playing the game now, we don't accidentally
yeah, but that's its own
spoil the
open. So
surprise.
there is so much,
And all of
just
them are sizable. Like
space.
all of them are pretty sizable.
Yeah.
The main like Europe map is by far the largest, but all the other stuff is like not insignificant. So
Vinland, Norway, and the dream sequence area are all relatively the same size, I'm gonna say. And then maybe Vinland's a little bit bigger than the other two. And then England is just huge. Like, it's
yeah, I'd say if you
massive.
combine the other three, you might get close to the size of England.
It's still bigger.
Yeah, England's
than
still
those
bigger
three
though.
combined. It's
Uh,
and I didn't feel,
big game.
and I guess part of it is maybe they wanted the size to reflect the actual like 1-to-1, or at least as close as they can, which I can understand. But I really do feel like cutting out a few I really do feel like cutting out a few of the arcs and then just
Especially in
consolidating
England.
England.
Like there's a lot of England to go through.
Yeah. And I think they tried their best to have different looking areas, because there are some areas that it's like, obviously there's like swampland, there's like a whole section that's just all snow in the mountains, and then a lot of just rolling green hills and mountains and
And
stuff.
like
So I think
very good looking. This game visually is very
gorgeous.
good looking.
There were people that were saying it didn't look next gen when it first came out, which I don't agree with at all. I think it looks gorgeous. I think they tried the best that they could in terms of trying to have different areas that had different looks to it, but I think it's so big that it still starts to look a little samey after a while.
Yeah.
And I really do think just because, like, here's the thing: if you cut out some of the arcs, you consolidated the size down. Not only could you have, I think, a better looking or a better designed open world area, but you could also have spent more time with the arcs that you kept in to make them a
Yeah.
little bit more like have a little bit more meat on their bones, and then maybe be able to tie in that ending a lot better.
It
Like I
also
really do
it
think cutting
feels
some content would have helped a lot personally.
it feels a little weird to recommend this, but I almost think if they could have just really what needs to happen is some of that stuff needs to be moved to not be part of the main missions because man, it takes way too long to get to the ending.
Have those other areas, like have Norway and have those areas be like the optional sort of like alliances if you want, right?
And like
And
what it really feels
just
like,
have England and then have England be the mandatory ones.
and I think what you really could have done is take a few of those sections and do the original Witcher 3 approach of release those as free DLC post launch, like once a month, give a nice injection of content that's like actually well made and produced and is like a substantial like 3-hour section of gameplay. And I think that would really help them keep players around, which seems to be their goal now, is to make Assassin's Creed a game you might play over a longer period of time. And that probably would have helped with that. I think that would have definitely cut some out from the main story and put some as like post-launch DLC. That would have been fun.
Oh, and we didn't even talk about, so Vinland is a weird section of the game.
Well,
I'm gonna talk about
we can't talk about that now because we are running late.
okay.
So we do have to cut off.
It's very
about
differently
here.
designed than the other areas of the game, and I wish more areas of the game had that kind of philosophy going on because I thought it was
Yeah, we'll likely talk about it again at some point because there's a lot to talk about with Valhalla that we've just kind of run out of time for because we've almost hit the 2-hour mark, Wyatt. We've been going at it.
We've been trucking.
And in order to keep our podcast uploads under size limitations, we gotta stop at a certain point. So that means I think overall impressions of Valhalla is pretty solid throughout, just maybe a bit too long.
And more inconsistent than
yeah, like the combat is a little odd in that you don't have a lot of the like flowiness that Odyssey had.
It's frustrating.
Whereas I think for me it's less of a problem because I'm bouncing between it and Dark Souls currently, so I'm used to like animation locking.
Okay.
So it's not as much of a problem to me, but it still does definitely stand out. It doesn't feel like Assassin's Creed. I think it would be a good way to put it. It feels a lot more like what I would get out of a proper like Middle Earth game almost is what this kind of feels appropriate to.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think overall, I think for me, Valhalla is probably my favorite of the three, just because I'm a history nerd as well, and it's ticking a lot of those boxes of just like a really cool portrayal of Europe in that time period, covering some really fun stuff that you get to see in other games as well. Like I just like the time period a lot and the locations.
Yeah, and obviously would not have spent as much time playing the game as I did if I didn't enjoy it. Like I do. I just wish it knew when to stop.
Yeah.
Like I wish it knew when, like, okay, we've shown off all of our bells and whistles, now we're gonna end. And I think that's what Immortals did really well. It's like, all right, we've shown off everything, now we're gonna end it right as we've kind of shown our last card. Whereas Valhalla's like, no, we can keep going, it's fine. Right? And it just is too bloated.
Yeah.
But I did enjoy it, obviously.
All right. Hey Wyatt, you know what that means it's time for?
Oh, is it tea time?
It's tea time for shoutouts.
Yeah.
Which means I'll start because I got to give a shout out to my dog. My dog Gracie is a trooper. She hurt her foot, fell in a hole in the dog park the other day, and has been limping. So we got to take her to the vet tomorrow because it's really really cute seeing her hop around on 3 legs, but I feel really really bad for her the entire time. And she's clearly not in pain because she's not whining or anything, but she's staying off of that foot, which has us a little concerned. So we're taking her into the vet, but she's a little trooper. So, and she's old too. She's like at this point like 15, and she's not really showing her age. So still doing really really well. All right, Wyatt, what you got for us?
Shout out to whoever wanted to put that really awesome Blade Runner Easter egg in Cyberpunk that I came across recently, and I thought it was awesome.
All right. Well, with that, we will see you all next week. as always, 7 a.m. Tuesday mornings on podcast platform and YouTube. We have fun here.
Yeah, we do. And look at that, we just hit the 2-hour mark.
We're actually going to hit the 2-hour mark exactly as the outro music ends.
Oh, we're so good at this. We're so good.